All right, let's jump in here. So I'm running two computers today because I think the problem is I think my HDMI connector is dead, and I think the room's VGA cable is dead, so neither of my connectors is working. I'll have to buy a new. My HDMI wasn't working in the last class I taught, but my VGA was, and now I'm like, all right, I just need to buy new connectors and see what happens. But I got it running on the room computer, so we should be okay. It does make things a little bit more complicated because to record it, I can't install the recording software on here or the streaming software on here without IST, and I don't have time for that. So if I forget to forward on one screen, I'm sorry. We'll do my best. Okay. Oops. Yep, that would make a problem. Give me half a sec. I just need to log into the Slido on here because I forgot to do that. Come on. There we go. Давай пойдем. Promise me you won't look. All right. Log in with Google. Oh, of course you're going to make me do that. My favorite new thing. And come on. Approved. It's not my fault that Chrome is out of date on here. Okay, perfect. All right, let's try that again. This time for sure. Okay, perfect. All right, yeah, so every time we do skip to a new unit, we're into a different kind of Slido, so we keep the questions kind of discrete, not running one thing all of the time. So, yeah, this is the new one. We're talking about a different subject today. I'm going to be talking about social research. Okay. Take a trip to Turkey. Okay. Don't know what that means. Practice midterm questions. Yeah, I will. I mean, we're still a couple of weeks away, but I will get them up as soon as I can. I'll put it on my to-do list. Oh no, the lecture is on YouTube. It's running on my laptop right now. Okay. The answers you seek are in the syllabus, but no, there are 3 exams. Okay. This lecture is going to be on YouTube. It's just, currently running on my laptop at the same time. So I am still streaming the streamy things. Okay, so practice midterm questions. I will try. People are feeling nervous. I will try to get those up this week. Usually I'm not that far in advance. I have them already. I just have to create it. Okay, let's see. Did I get a chance to play Rocket League? A little bit. It's pretty busy when school is on. I haven't added it. Okay, is this? Yeah, so this will be on Monday. Okay, I have it on YouTube. I just haven't added it to the playlist. I will do that this afternoon, and it'll be there. Yes, I can do that. I just forgot to do it on Monday. Okay, functionalism. Does functionalism stress a return to a set equilibrium, or can it recognize a change towards a different equilibrium being good? No, that's a good question. Actually, that's a really good question. No, definitely a new equilibrium can be good, right? Just that if something is out of equilibrium socially, eventually you have to bring it back into some kind of equilibrium, or society will remain in dysfunction and things get bad for people. But no, because I mean, there's some sense in functionalism, right, that you can't always go backwards, right? Certainly interested as it is in the Industrial Revolution and those changes, Durkheim wasn't like, yeah, we can totally go back to living in medieval villages. He didn't think that was possible. So yeah, it's like we need to create a new order. Okay. So, social research. like I said at the beginning of the course, and I'll try to get through the kind of unit on social research as quickly as I can, because I know, it's less exciting than some of the themed chapters. But one of the things that sociology really wants to do, again, is sort of get people out of traditional thinking, right? And into scientific thinking, right? It thinks of itself as a social science, observing the world through a scientific method, except that it's looking at society. So one of the important things for sociology is to, combat kind of unscientific thinking, right? And yeah, I mean, this is a sort of recognition that in our lives, right, on a daily basis, we have biases that influence our observations of the world and often lead to a really skewed kind of way of seeing what is going on, right? And so one of the things, you might perceive a phenomenon going on in your own life in a particular way that once you kind of get to the meta level, right? Once you take it out beyond your personal experience into kind of the social level where you look at it in a way more objectively or more scientifically, you might see things in a different way and see that your perspective is actually just shaped by the kind of limits you have on your own kind of way of seeing things or your position in society or whatever, right? Okay, but yeah, biases, lead us to draw incorrect conclusions about what we see. And, there's kind of 10 common unscientific, 10 errors are found in unscientific thinking, and that scientific thinking seeks to avoid. Okay, so unscientific thinking, right? One of these can be tradition, right? So tradition, often tradition is about what's called heuristics, what's worked in the past. Heuristics basically just another way of saying what's worked in the past, right? So we have a tradition of doing things a certain way because it's always been kind of efficacious, right? So, tradition can be things like, I have the examples here of chicken soup, right? To cure a cold, right? Well, it's like, chicken soup must be the cure for the common cold because people seem to have chicken soup and feel better, right? And therefore, there must be something in chicken soup that affects the cold in some way. In my grandmother's case, my grandmother, who was Ukrainian, she believed that pepper vodka was the cure for a cold. So, I remember her at 16 giving me a shot of pepper vodka when I was sick, and me thinking this was quite funny until I swallowed the stuff. But, it was a kind of a traditional belief that she had because she'd always done that when she was ill, and it made her feel better. I mean, it did make me feel warm and tingly inside, but I don't think that was my cold being cured, right? So tradition often kind of leads us in the wrong way, right? Because it's like traditional wisdom will say, these things worked in the past, but it might not have a basis in what's the mechanics of what's actually going on, right? It's probably the hydration of the chicken soup that helps you get over your cold, not, chicken soup having some anti-cold properties. Okay, authority being the next one, right? Some person in authority or some person that you think is authoritative that for some reason holds, a position of prominence has said something and therefore, you cite that person's authority as a reason you believe it, right? So my professor said it's true. The president says this, the prime minister said this, and because they're in a position of authority, it must be true, right? Now, that's not to say authority figures are not always, don't say things that are true, but instead of appealing to their authority as the source of truth, the more scientific way is appealing to the evidence that they have collected and are citing, right? So it's not that, Professor Smith, says X, it's that Professor Smith did this procedure, right? Professor Smith did this study, and the study showed the following. Not just that Professor Smith is such a cool person. Okay, casual observation. We often kind of make casual observations about the world, right? We think we see kind of general trends, but the truth is that most of the time we're not paying attention. Like we're not paying careful attention, right? So you might think that people who drive Ram pickup trucks are overly aggressive, right? They're aggressive drivers, they speed, they try to run you off the road when you're on the Henday. And so there must be some kind of correlation between Ram truck ownership and terrible driving, right? But this is a sort of casual observation, right? You've probably driven on the Hyundai, seen a lot of Ram trucks driving erratically, and you made a sort of casual observation. But the truth is, maybe you're just not paying close enough attention, right? You don't see all the times where Ram trucks are driving and following the speed limit, or when other kinds of cars are careening down the road at breakneck speeds, right? You just, for some reason, have focused in on, in your casual observation on this one particular case. Okay, so all good so far? Pretty straightforward, right? Overgeneralizations are, you have a small number of cases or even a single case where something happened, and therefore you have to be, that must apply generally, right? So I knew this guy, he moved here from somewhere and they were dirt poor, but he worked really hard. And then he got really rich. So that, it must be possible for everyone to do so, right? Excuse me. That would be a kind of overgeneralization. Selective observation, which we do all the time, right? Looking at the particular cases that you care about, right? Seeing only what you want, right? So it's like, I don't know, maybe for some reason, like my mother-in-law is like this. She, for some reason, hates Ford, the car company. And so she'll point out every time that, there's a Ford that breaks down on the side of the road. She's like, see, Fords are junk, right? But then she never points out the Honda or the Toyota or any other kind of car that's broken down on the side of the road. She just kind of focuses in on the observation she wants, right? So it's a selective observation. See only what you want, ignore the rest. And we all do this to some extent. Okay, do I have I should have had a question slide. Okay, still good. Okay, qualification. It's true in most cases, but not that one, right? So basically, sometimes people will seek to kind of look for the exception or make one particular case, often their social context, the exception, right? It might be true in general that, I don't even know, XYZ, poor people are poor because of structural inequalities, but that's not the case in my community, right? It's because they're lazy, right? That would be a kind of qualification, right? True in most cases, but not in one. Illogical reasoning, right? I think you can think of illogical reasoning in a lot of cases as kind of one of the roots of conspiracy theories. So, seeing a pattern where none exists, right? This is always like, when you think of, I don't know. I see here, and now I'm thinking, I've got only car-based examples stuck in my head. I had dropped my car off at a dealership to get some work done, and I was getting a ride back, and the driver started in on like the World Economic Forum and Carl Schwab, and you see like the price of oil is going up, and it was 2 days after Carl Schwab made this speech at the World Economic Forum, and blah 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 blah. Anyway, I then was like, please let me out of the car. I only wanted to ride home. Why are you talking to me about crazy things? But right, it's like I've connected these two things and I see a correlation or a causative kind of link, but actually what you're doing is you're illogically kind of linking two things that have absolutely nothing to do with each other, right? That's illogical reasoning. Ego defense, right? You believe something, and no matter how much evidence is, that supports the opposite position is thrown in your direction, you refuse to change your mind because whatever thing you're discussing happens to be really important to you. Maybe you've made it part of your personal identity. You see this a lot with conspiracy theorists too, right? Conspiracy theorists like to think like, oh, I'm one of the enlightened ones because I've seen this pattern in the world that nobody else sees. Carl Schwab, Jewish space lasers, blah, blah, blah. Anyway. All these sort of weird conspiracy theory ideas. This is like Q, right? All this QAnon kind of stuff. It's all like, and then you try to talk to someone and you're like, actually, none of those things are true, and here's the evidence. And they're like, you're just part of the plot to trick me or to trick everybody. You've bought in, you're a sheeple, right? Refusing contradictory evidence, usually because that belief is so important to you, so you kind of push that evidence off to the one side. Premature closure of inquiry, number 9. Basically, in maybe looking at things in a limited number of cases, and then stopping, no longer asking any questions, right? okay, we've seen that, in this small number of cases, this happens. We can stop looking rather than continuing investigation, because future investigation might reveal other things, right? Especially if it's a really small number of cases. And then mystification, I guess you could see conspiracy theories in mystification as well. There are greater forces at work than we can understand. Maybe there's, God or the force or karma or the World Economic Forum or the Illuminati or, something like that. It doesn't always have to be conspiracy theories. Now I'm just listing conspiracy theories. But right, there's some kind of greater force at work that we could never possibly understand, so we shouldn't even try. Okay, let's go back a couple. Whoops. I went too far. Just so I can, working with two screens is, did I know Einstein was alive 5 hours before he died? Sure. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, selective observation, the same as confirmation bias. Yeah, I mean, selective observation would be, kind of a form of tripping over my own tongue. Confirmation bias. Okay. Yeah, I mean, casual observation. Sorry, you're right here. Like for casual observation, you said we're focusing maybe on one object, RAM, trucks. Yeah, here you're making maybe a casual observation. It might also be another form and selective observation here of, you're over focusing on one kind of thing to back up your idea. It might be based on a casual observation, right? You're sort of like half paying attention and you just happen to notice this one thing, right? But I think you're right there. I think that's good. Okay. Sorry, this is really disruptive trying to run two things. Okay. Do we study any specific conspiracy theories? No. Sadly, there's other courses for that. There used to be a class on cults, which was really fun. And it's not conspiracy theories, but also really fun. Okay. So, when we talk about, how we do social research, one of the things that we tend to be focused on is how do you get information about the social world, right? Now, one of the big problems that we face is that it's essentially impossible once you get beyond the size of a certain group to get like a total picture of that group, right? You might be able to get like your friend group, a family, maybe a religious community, a social club. But once you get into like, say, a city, a province, or a state, a country, it becomes really, really difficult to get access to the whole of that kind of group that you're interested in thinking, right? So we're talking about, say, like the big group, the whole group that you want to say something about. You're talking about the population, right? That is the entire group you want to generalize about. But most of the time, it gets to be really difficult to kind of sample the entire population. Simply because most populations are too big and you trying to interview or survey everybody would never work, right? There are practical reasons it doesn't work. So instead, what we have typically is samples, right? So a sample, is just a part of the population that you're interested in studying. And generally what you're looking for is a representative sample, right? So you want a sample, like a smaller group, that is basically looks like the larger population, right? So it would have the same age structure, it would have the same makeup in terms of kind of race, religion, male, female, like sex and gender, all of those kinds of things, right? So that once you have a kind of sample of the population, you could then sort of, and if it's representative of your population, you could generalize out from that sample. Okay. Yeah, scientific research, I don't know why I chuckled there. Maybe objectivity is not possible. Maybe that's why. One goal of scientific research, right, is to produce, and this is true in social science as well, is to produce quasi-objective results, right? And basically, objectivity here means the degree of consistency between the observation of independent observers, right? So that theoretically, what you're observing, what you're measuring would not, or describing, would be the same regardless of who is observing it, right? So this is sometimes referred to as, objectivity, or intersubjectivity is the term that we sort of use more commonly in sociology now. Intersubjectivity just means that any person, like any subject, could basically look at the same data and should see roughly the same information, right? That everybody should sort of see things in the same way because the data has been collected in a relatively, I guess, objective way. Okay. Can casual observations be racially motivated? Yeah, of course. Of course, it can be motivated by any number of things, right? Okay, every 60 seconds, a minute in Africa, a minute passes. Good information. Selective observation and premature closure. I mean, so basically, premature closure. You've got, let's say you've done a certain amount of observation, right? But theoretically, there's no reason to say, premature closure, right? I'm getting tripped up on my own head, in my own head. So premature closure, right? You've done some kind of work, you've done some observation, and then you just assume that because you've done a small amount, that's enough, and there's no reason to continue doing more. You say like, I don't know, maybe I'll get in trouble for this, but like the science has spoken, right? This is a sort of way of prematurely closing observation in a lot of cases, only because, in kind of science and the scientific method, there's always more observations that you could make, right? Maybe better tools will come around tomorrow or a different procedure, new information will come to light. There's no reason to ever sort of say, that's enough data, right? There's no reason to continue even researching things because we already know. Okay. So I think so selective observation is just like you pick only the things that back up your particular case, right? The thing that you want to say, right? I only see those aspects of the world that I want to see, right? I only see, that police are terrible because I only focus on evidence of police violence. Not the cases in which they're helpful, right? Or I only see, whatever phenomenon you want to say, right? You're only focusing on what you want to see. Okay. Can I re-explain objectivity? Sure. What really is mystification, right? It's just like we can't understand why something is happening, right? There's no way, there's some greater force at work, so we can't understand why a phenomenon is happening, so we shouldn't even bother, right? That's mystification. It's almost like, there's some kind of mystic force, the multiverse of madness or whatever, right? I don't even know. Things are happening and we can never figure out why. That's mystification. All right, I think that takes care of 2 questions, hopefully. Are multiple methods of unscientific thinking often used in the same conclusion? Yeah, I would think people mix and match, right? And certainly don't think of these categories as mutually exclusive, right? Someone could be involved in multiple types of unscientific thinking at the same time, right? You could have tradition and, selective observation going on in the same moment. Okay. I'm going to go back a couple slides here for a sec to my list of unscientific thinking, because you want to know about, I'm going to make you sick, qualification and ego defense. Qualification, right, is more just like true in most cases, right? Generally that might be true, but it's not true in the case of this one thing, right? Versus ego defense, which is just like, I'm not even going to listen to contradictory evidence, usually because whatever it is so important to you that you refuse to listen to anything that contradicts it, right? So qualifications, true in some cases, but I'm going to say my case or this case that I'm interested in doesn't apply. Ego defense, I'm not going to listen at all because I'm so threatened by your question. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, sorry, I know you can't see the questions, but I have 2 screens now, so I can and you can't. Can I explain casual observation more? It's just, think about how you move through life, right? You're often not paying attention, right? Or not fully paying attention. And so you might see a phenomenon, right? You might see something happening out in the world, and because you're only observing it casually and not kind of deep diving and looking at it in a scientific way, right? You're not looking at, say, the personality characteristics of truck owners. You're just looking at what you see based on this, right? So your casual observation, you're like, I conclude that all truck drivers must be X because this is what I've sort of seen. You know, I wasn't really paying attention, but as I drive around, I think truck owners are jerks, and they take up too much space, and all their trucks are on 18 wheels and 40 feet tall or whatever, right? But you're not really paying attention, and you haven't done like, okay, I'm going to do a survey of truck owners, and I'm going to ask them these questions, or I've interviewed people who own trucks. Like you just kind of made, you know, I'm driving, this is what I can say about these people. Or, you know, like people do this a lot with race. You know, all white people are like X, right? But it's not based on like a scientific study of it. It's just a casual observation of the people they've interacted with, right? Okay. Casual observation. Can a sample be called? Okay, sorry, I will flick back here so you can see the questions again. Would dark matter, dark energy be considered mystification? Sure, I don't know. I'm not sure what you're referring to in terms of dark matter. Okay, can I re-explain objectivity? Like rather easily, right? Objectivity, right? Basically, is it like if two people are looking at the same thing based on a certain set of data, they should be able to see the same thing. Okay, so think about it this way, right? Like in the scientific method, right, that you all learned probably from elementary school on, the idea is that no matter who does the research, right? So if I'm studying the mating habits of fruit flies, and I have a study procedure, right, for how I'm going to look at how fruit flies reproduce, if, you know, Ivan at the University of Omsk in Eastern or Siberia is like, reads my paper and is like, I want to see, you know, I want to see this as well. I want to check Dr. Broussard's from Edmonton, Alberta's, you know, study on fruit fly reproduction. He does the same procedure. He gets the same results, right? It's a little different in sociology, but it's kind of the same idea, right? If we look at the same data, if you collect the same data using the same method, you should get the same results. So basically, you should have consistency in terms of the phenomenon you're describing, regardless of the observer, right? So independent observers should be able to see the same thing. That's objectivity, or like I said, we more commonly now refer to it as intersubjectivity. So between different people, like intersubjects, you should have the same kind of results, the same kind of view of the world. Hopefully that makes sense. Yes, intersubjectivity and objectivity are synonyms. Sorry, someone put that. I lost the question because someone, okay, I re-explained objectivity. Hopefully, yeah. Intersubjectivity and objectivity are basically the same thing, right? But there's been a little bit of a shift because, especially in the social sciences, people have become convinced because of guys like Foucault and Derrida that no one can be truly objective because everybody has a point of view. So it's more about, you know, intersubjective, right? So between different people, you should come up with the same results. And so it's the same word that basically means the same, a different word that basically means the same thing. Yes. Do you need the textbook to prepare for exams? I promise I will stop answering this question very soon. No, as I've said a couple times already, basically the textbook is additional. I won't test you on anything that I don't also talk about in class, but it's there for you. And I built the class around it so that if what I'm saying is blah, 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 doesn't make sense to you, you know, it's like I'm speaking in Greek, or if you speak Greek, another language that isn't Greek. I don't speak Greek. But, you know, it's like I'm speaking in gibberish words. You can go to the textbook and be like, oh, the person who wrote this chapter is much smarter than Dr. Broussard and explained things much better. That's kind of what it's there for, right? All right. No further questions on the textbook. Are there consequences for sociologists who present data with a premature closure of inquiry? Yes, you'll be relentlessly mocked by your peers. Typically not, you know, formal. It's just a mode of unscientific thinking that you want to avoid, right? And clearly, if you've prematurely closed the data, people are then going to disagree with you and find contradictory results, and your reputation will be ruined. You'll end up, losing your job and your reputation. Or, since you have tenure, you will sit in your office grumbling about your dead career and never publish another thing, but still keep your job. Because that's how tenure works. Would I mind? Okay, here, that one's easier. Can sample be called a subset of the population? Yeah, so basically, a sample is a subset of the population, and it can be representative of the population as a whole if you select the participants correctly, right? There's a particular, anyway, you don't have to worry about this unless you come and take Intro to Social Methods, where we're going to talk about population sampling until you probably want to hit your head against the wall. There's a bunch of different ways of doing population sampling to get what's called a representative sample, which means that your sample closely mirrors the construction of society, right? Or of whatever population you want. Again, in terms of things like age, race, gender, religious belief, all of these things, right? Representative samples are how you get something that can then be generalized out to that population. And there are particular methods for doing this, which in SOS 100, we don't have to worry a ton about. So, good question though. Examples of qualification. Okay, let's go back again. Okay, so it's true in most cases, right? So, qualification. So, I'm trying to think of one that isn't overly stereotypical, because stereotypes are easy to do. Yeah. Okay. So let's say you have someone, who is dating, and is like, in most, and say you have sort of. Oh, okay. Hang on. Let me rethink this. All right. Sorry. It's a hard one. Men. Okay. So we know from the criminological literature, right, that men, and we'll talk about this when we get to deviance, men tend to be, on the whole, much more aggressive and violent than women, right? Just kind of from a biological point of view, right? So you might be like, yeah, I know that the data says that in most cases, men are more violent and more, aggressive, and therefore end up in prison more, except I'm going to say in this case, except in the case that I'm interested in, women are more violent because sort of I say so, right? Because that's maybe what I observed, when studying female gangs. So I think women are more violent than men, right? That would be a kind of qualification. Or, okay, I know that the literature says, and lots of studies says that men are more violent, but really if you think of violence more as, gossiping, then, women are more violent, right? That's a sort of qualification, right? It's like, well, actually not in the case that I'm interested in or kind of what I think, right? So yes, in most cases or in this kind of definition, but my definition is better. Or, in the particular group of people, high school girls in West Edmonton, they're actually much more violent. I don't know. So that would be, so I conclude that that's NIMBYism. Could NIMBYism be couldn't all scientific? So, okay, hopefully that's good for qualification. Thinking of examples on the fly that aren't the one I thought of initially are always fun. Couldn't all scientific studies be subject to closure of inquiry? Certainly, but as long as you don't sort of say we don't need to learn anything else, right? So as long as you're thinking is, well, this could be disproven in the future, so we should continue studying it. It's premature closure of inquiry is more like, yeah, we know everything we need to know about this phenomenon. No one else should even look at it because I've said everything there is to say about it, right? I realized, I have two screens going on. So that top question, yeah, anyone could say, we know everything, we know all we need to know about climate change or vaccines or blah, blah, blah. As long as you're kind of open to new evidence coming along that could disprove things later, you're not prematurely closing inquiry. It's when you say, yeah, well, these few cases I have, tell me everything we ever need to know about this phenomenon. Could NIMBYism be a form of qualification? Density good generally, but not in my neighborhood. Yeah, that would be that's an interesting example. Yeah, like, yes, it would be great to build denser housing over there. It might, denser housing is great. It mixes neighborhoods, but my neighborhood's really nice already. So no. I actually have a friend who's a developer, and this particular thing drives him crazy. He's trying to build like right by McKernan School, and the neighbors have like hired the neighborhood hired high-powered lawyers and lobbyists to lobby city council that actually in our neighborhood it would be really bad. Students might move in. So, yeah. No, seriously, like I was at the council meetings. It was funny. They were like, yeah, but we don't really want students living that close to us. I was like, guys, you're all professors. They're like, yeah, that's the point. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. They might see us. We might meet our students in the neighborhood. And what would happen then? Okay. Your questions are great. It's murdering my timeline completely. I thought this would go fast, and we're like 10 slides in. Okay, and I got 37 slides. Okay, but we're going to be here until I'm done. I got nothing to do. There's no class for me, and there's no class in this room after, so you're just going to stay till I'm done. I'm kidding. Okay, important viewpoint, right? I know, I scared all of you. You're like, oh my God, he's gone insane, and it's only week 3. Concepts and principles, right? So, yeah, I mean, kind of the concepts and principles that you come into things with do kind of shape the reality that you see, right? And we call this like viewpoint or worldview, right? How you look at the world shapes it. So viewpoint shapes reality, right? And this is something that often is kind of difficult for people to recognize doing social research, is that their viewpoint might be shaping the kind of studies they want to do, the way they interpret data, and these sorts of things. And being, cognizant of that really matters, right? And so think about that example that I gave of the fashion cycle, right? If you have adopted, say, one of the theories that I talked about in the last unit, right, you could see the fashion cycle in different ways because you're coming from a different kind of point of view, right? So viewpoint matters enormously to the realities that people experience and the way researchers do research. Okay. When we're doing social research too, like there are certain things that insiders know and outsiders know, right? So when you're talking about, say, a group, right? If you're studying a group or a province or a country or anything, right? The position of the researcher will often affect what they're able to know about a group, right? Because, insiders, if you are inside of a group, right? Say that you are interested in doing a study on furries. The laughter can begin. And you yourself are a furry, right? And you have access to the inside of that community, right? You can say certain things about furries that an outsider might not be able to, right? You could get access to, intimate understanding, sensitivities, knowledge that outsiders might not have access to, right? Because you're already part of that community, right? Or, a religious community, right? If you are, the member of a church or a synagogue or a mosque, right, you could get access to those inner spaces in much more kind of intimate ways than people from outside would be. However, there's obviously the problem there of a little bit of bias, right? Because you might be, biased in favor of that group or present them in a positive light because you're one of them, right? And so your insiderness would make, certain things possible, but also, an unbiased description hard. And there's advantages to being an insider. Outsiders, right, offer a different view, right? From kind of a view from the outside, sometimes it can be a little bit more at a distance, right? So you can make observations about a phenomenon or a case that might be really interesting because you're coming at it from an outside perspective, but you might not have as much kind of insider knowledge, right? And so like people who do, like, I'll tell you, like I did my PhD study on a very fun and interesting topic, Russian TV fiction. I know, sounds weird. I only spent 9 years of my life working on these things, so, so Russian TV fiction, and I came at it from a Canadian perspective, right? Which gave me some interesting kind of like arm's length insight. But one of the things that I became very aware of was that there were certain things that I just could not understand, right? So there were like references people made on television that didn't make any sense to me. Why? Because I just didn't have that insider's perspective. Some things that were like emotionally resonant, right, just didn't make sense to me because it was like, I don't understand the point of reference culturally that they're looking at. So I could say things as an outsider, at a distance from Russian culture that I think were interesting. I hope so, because I wrote like 270 pages about it in my dissertation. Otherwise, I guess I was just wasting my time. But I missed certain things and I was aware of it because I'm not an insider. I'm not Russian. And so I didn't have access to everything that, say, an insider would have. But that insider might not have been able to look at it from an objective kind of point of view, or an outsider's point of view, rather, in the same way. Okay, how am I doing for time? 2 screens, not happy. Okay, 6 minutes, I still got time. Even though half the class is trying to leave, I still got some time. I know we're so far away in TELUS that people are like, I need to leave to get to my next class on time. So I make fun, but I don't, it doesn't bother me if people start leaving towards the end. Okay, so connecting ideas to evidence. Okay, so there's basically 2 forms of research that we do in sociology. There's qualitative, which we'll talk about on this slide, and then there's quantitative, which is on the next slide. So qualitative research in sociology is basically about, the quality of things. That's a bad definition. It's about trying to get access to people's subjective points of view, right? So basically, concrete experience, right? So it mostly has to do with people's experiences of the social world, right? So typically what you're wanting to do is, in qualitative research, is talk to people, right? Or observe people in the kind of natural social environment, right? Out in society, out in their workplace, at the furry convention. You laughing just completely threw me off. Whatever it happens to be. This is, where you're going to do your research, because what you really want is access to people's experiences, right? So you have to do it in a way that accesses people's, like, what people are experiencing, right? So a couple ways of doing this, right? Interviews are the most common one. Focus groups, where you just ask people about what they think. And then ethnography and participant observation are kind of the other ones, where you actually kind of immerse yourself in the social setting. Okay, so yeah, typically in qualitative research, right, you wouldn't want to talk to a single person. You want to get the experience of a single setting. You would want to get a few cases so you can kind of see and compare, people's perceptions, different group settings and how they work. And then you analyze them to kind of find common patterns. And then basically, the way it usually works in qualitative research is you don't start with, say, a hypothesis. You sort of say, well, I'm going to go gather a bunch of data, so I'm going to go hang out, I'm going to throw on my costume, I'm going to dress as a cat, and go to the furry convention and make some observations, and then I'm going to come up with an explanation for why, furries act in certain ways, right? And you provide your interpretation of those things. Okay. Okay. Do I have a... Couldn't an outsider be biased as well? Yeah, you might think something is weird because it's different from real. Yes, definitely. Insiders and outsiders are both biased in their own ways. Anyway, they're biased in their own ways, but in those biases, they can reveal some things that the other side can't see. So each has its kind of pluses and minuses. Going to a furry convention is not a field trip. You have to do that in Intro to Social Methods. Soc 315. I'm kidding. No. But yeah, I just use it as an example because I started using it as an example and people laugh. And mostly I'm just here to make you laugh. Okay, well, we got 2 minutes left and I see, people getting restless. Let's call her quits for today. We'll keep going on social research. We should have her done, I think, on Friday, and then we'll be on to something else next week.